This follows on as the second half of the lecture we would have had on the 8th of March at APK, lecture 5.2. Remember that we're looking at the fifth theme in your Politics Semester A, Term 1, and it's the media and political communication, and we stopped at the last lecture on the media, democracy and governance, and how democracy can be promoted through the use of the media in four key ways. And the first one is the media acting as agents of political communication, political education, and to foster political debate. So this is an important one because the media really do act as a kind of what we call civic forum for meaningful and serious debate to take place in the public realm. In this sense, the media can replace the role of traditional representative bodies, for example, like assemblies, meetings, local councils, etc. And in fact, the media can become an arena for dialogue. In many ways, the media is more suited as a platform for people to negotiate and dialogue, because it offers a forum for expression of a wide range of views and opinions, so the public's invited into this discussion. It's lively and engaging, and it can replace stuffy and boring political events where people are lost in the words expressed by one speaker speaking for too long. The media is a direct, meaningful, impactful way for the public to actually become involved. If you have a look at this example of a 2016 election through the Seattle Times newspapers trying to inspire students to learn, this was posted or presented in newspapers, and it was explaining how the election process is a critical role for you because you can actually learn about how your role in electing your national, state and local leaders has an effect on the country in which you live, using bright colors, using images, using different symbols. It's eye-catching, and it helps get the audience involved in something that's political. If you want to try and avoid stuffy and boring pieces, or looking at white papers that can be very lengthy, or green papers or policy papers that can be very lengthy, sometimes it's easier for the media to educate the public in their own, more relaxed way. There is a blog called Constitutionally Speaking, and what this blog does is it deals with political and social issues in South Africa, mostly from the perspective of constitutional law, written by Pierre de Vos. For example, in 2013 he wrote about the outcry of police brutality being a sheer hypocritical statement. And he looks at things like politicians, the leadership of the South African Police Service, and many members of the chattering classes claim to be surprised and shocked by video footage showing a man being dragged behind a police vehicle. So these kinds of blogs help create interest in the public, especially around very sensitive material like xenophobic attacks, for example, which is what is being referred to in this piece that I just read here. The next slide might be very sensitive for some people, but please take it in the spirit of how it's intended, which is how political cartoons might prove to act as controversial educators of society. This political cartoon is trying to make fun or make sense of, or at least bring to the world's attention, how President Zuma has raped the South African state by demeaning the state, degrading the state, taking what he wanted from the state without the state's permission. That refers to the misuse of public funds around Nkandla, corruption allegations that are over their 700th by this point, and this refers to the Guptas and their involvement through cronyism, etc., in state organs. There's the New Age, ANN7 represented there, and South Africa is lying on the floor. So political cartoons can sometimes be very controversial and very sensitive, but they are trying to convey a very particular message, and even if something's considered indecent or insensitive or gross in a way, to use a dramatic term, it does get the point across. So the question would be, how far do you think political cartoonists should be allowed to go before their freedom of expression is curtailed in the interests of politics? Another example might be the democracy acting as a watchdog, which is the second point, which we began at the beginning of the lecture, on media, democracy, and governance. How can the media promote democracy? The first way was to try and promote democracy through political education and public debate. The second way is through acting as a public watchdog. What this means is that the media can try to ensure public accountability by scrutinizing the executive. In other words, by scrutinizing the actions of the president and his cabinets, and by exposing abuses of power, as it tried to do through Guptagate and then Kundlagate scandals. The media technically is outside of politics, looking in, observing politics, and writing and reporting on politics, which is a good thing because they should really not have any other interest other than to expose corruption or to expose immoral behavior in society. If accountability was left in the hands of professional politicians, how far would accountability actually come to fruition? Some people would want to hold on to government power forever and would never see themselves accountable or responsible for any of their actions. So we say no to this. The media should act as a watchdog to ensure that this accountability stands. And in order to do so, the media must be independent because it must be able to perform its role properly without being or receiving flack from certain segments of the government. Independent commissions might then be required in order to establish the independence of the media, to ensure the ethics of the media, and to ensure that the media is performing its proper function in society. There was the indication of a secrecy bill in South Africa when there were concerns that, by President Zuma, that the media was looking into his personal or private issues that were of no interest to the public, especially considering Nkandla is a private residence. The problem comes in when public money is used to fund somebody's private house. Then it is in the public's interest. What do you think? Do you think there are certain things the public should not know, should be kept secret from the public, that the media should not be allowed to expose or to write on? For example, state secrets. If media expose state secrets, it could expose very important private information that the state has to hold secret for its own survival as a state. This was especially true during the Cold War, when you had real spies and spy systems, as in James Bond, but real life James Bonds working across America and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. If you have a look very quickly at this Reporters Without Borders, it's just Reporters Sans Frontières, which is a French word for Reporters Without Borders. South Africa was 37th in the world when it came to press freedom, which is really very, very good last year. 37 out of 193 states is very good in terms of our ranking. Look at the press worldwide in 2016 and the level of freedom then. South Africa here is in yellow, which is a satisfactory situation. We have a very good situation in the Nordic states up at the top, and in Greenland. I wonder if that's because nothing ever happens there to report on. We have Australia, Canada, the US, some European states and Iceland, some South American states and some African states also being seen as satisfactory in terms of press freedom. That is, freedom of information, freedom of the press worldwide. Where it's a very difficult situation would be in Russia, Egypt, for example, Algeria, Angola, Indonesia, Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, and some of these other states up at the top here that were formerly communist states during the Cold War. And then very difficult or very serious situations would be in China, where they actually go out of their way to limit internet access. Iran, Saudi Arabia, often many Islamic states would like to restrict access to Western media. Thirdly, one of the other ways that the media might be used to try and promote democracy would be through redistributing power and political influence in society. If you think about it, new media can enlarge access to information because the media is greater, it's larger, it has access to more people. We had the first and second communication revolutions, which you can see in your textbook on page 186. And then we had the third communication revolution in the 1990s, which created the information society. See this website to look at more statistics, and they're updated every year. What the media does tend to do is empower non-state actors, for example, NGOs, which stands for non-governmental organizations. It empowers think tanks like SIA, the South African Institute of International Affairs, like the IGD based in Pretoria, which is the Institute for Global Dialogue, the ISS, the Institute for Security Studies, the Center for Conflict Resolution, CFR in Cape Town. Those are types of think tanks where people are hired as researchers to investigate and write reports about various events around the world. It helps to empower anti-globalization protesters. It helps in many ways. So what the media does is actually widens the distribution of power. Remember what power is. It's the ability to influence other people's behavior and make them do something they otherwise wouldn't do. So the media has a huge amount of potential power in changing people's attitudes and making them do something they wouldn't normally do. Consider how social media may have accelerated the uprising in Egypt in 2011. We spoke about the uprisings through the Arab Spring in one of our earlier lectures this term. The question is, did Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube send people out into the streets? Of course, these three social media sites did not do that, but they did speed up the protest of protest. Absolutely. There is the idea of the rise of citizen journalism, how the ordinary person can be somebody to spark an international political event, how social media might be keeping an Egyptian revolution alive, for example. And then lastly, what is the media's democratic potential? If there's new technology like cyber democracy, e-democracy, electronic democracy, and you can see this in your textbook on page 186, where e-democracy, which is sometimes called digital democracy or cyber democracy, refers to the use of computer-based technologies to enhance citizens' engagement in democratic processes. So it could happen in different ways, through a representative model, through a deliberative model, and through an activist model. You can find all of those different examples on page 186 of your textbook. The advantages to new media and the democratic potential of this is that it overcomes the problem of size in terms of the size of your population. It overcomes the problem of your citizens' access to information, because what it does is that it enlarges how many people actually do have access to information through so many different and diverse platforms. It also enables citizens to express their views much more easily than ever before, by the touch of a button, by the click of a button literally, by liking something or not liking something on Facebook. The problem, though, with this kind of thing and new technology is that electronic fraud and malpractice could take place, as well as push-button referendums, which you can see as well on page 187 of your textbook. The idea is that there are reservations about what impact new media can actually have in terms of promoting democracy. Electronic fraud is a serious concern. President Obama, during one of his election campaigns, certainly used the internet to try and boost support for his campaign, but he did not rely solely on the internet. He also used the old-fashioned television adverts and newspaper campaigns too, to try and get his voice heard across America. So there are reservations about the media's capacity to what happens when content might be tainted by political bias. The media itself is not necessarily subject to public accountability at all times, even if there are media tribunals. And of course, there's always the concern that people might doubt the media's independence. The media, after all, do work for certain people in society, and the owners of media structures might hold sway and influence politics at some point. So there are reservations about just how much media can actually influence democracy across the globe. We'll end there.